Hello and welcome to the Cosmic Heart Podcast. I am your host, Jessica Hope, and today this is going to be the very first Cosmic Heart Podcast episode. I would like to get into some background about myself and essentially just talk about what it is that I'm here to share and what the purpose of this podcast is. There's a lot of podcasts out there in the world these days. Everybody is looking for a platform to share what it is that they have to bring to the world. And I think that that's awesome. I think it's a beautiful thing. The internet really does help connect the world in such an integrative and just beautiful way. I would like to start with my background on what it is that brought me to where I am today. And I'm just going to essentially try to abbreviate, but just, so you understand me, I definitely do when I get into a flow of talking about things. Tend to be very thorough, tend to be very in depth. I like to go in depth. I like to go to the core of things. And that's just who I am. So I, as a little girl, I essentially always knew that I had gifts and abilities. I always knew that I was capable of doing things that were different than other people my age. And that was all throughout my life. That was growing up, as a teenager. It definitely became a lot more evident as a teenager. When I became a mother is when I really started to recognize that I had more um, abilities than other people that I knew. And what that looked like for me was um, I I recognized that I always had very intense psychic abilities, and I could also tell the future. I was able to know what was going to happen before it happened very, very often. Some examples of that for me was like with my mother. She had experienced some difficult times as I was growing up, and most people do. And so when she would get into certain relationships, she would have this notion that the mask that that person was showing her was in fact who they were. And I feel like internally she saw certain things, but she didn't want to pay attention to them. She wanted to believe in the facade because it made her feel some sense of security and hope within that relationship. And I can understand that. But even as a little girl and growing up, I remember vividly telling her, this person is not what you think they are. They're going to do this, this, and this. And they always did it, and it happened. And she would get so upset with me when I would tell her certain things about people at the time. And then later on, when they would do it, she would come back to me and she would cry and she'd say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You were right. I should have listened to you. And when that happens so many times, you think, that okay, the person is going to respect and trust your gifts and your abilities. So um for for whatever the purpose was, whatever the lesson was there on both ends, she didn't. And so it was a repeated process of over many different things for many different years where I would try to tell her certain things, and then I would get a very strong divine guidance on certain messages for her. Then I would try to explain it to her, and for some reason, she often didn't listen. I'm not really sure what the lesson is on that for her, but that's for her to decide later on, I suppose. So I suppose she's also learning that lesson now due to some current things that she's experiencing. Um, So, and then what I noticed also, I would be hanging out with my friends as a kid and as a teenager, and I noticed that I would tell them things like, as a teenager specifically comes to mind. I would say uh, something about that a person that they would know, and then I would try to let them know, like, hey, be careful of that person. And then usually it would be exactly the message I got would be what happened. We would be walking down a path. One specific friend I had, her name is Felice. I remember we were walking down specific bike trails and areas that usually were in the dark, and I would tell her like, "Don't go down that way," and she'd ask me why, and then I said, "There's a guy off in the distance that way," and I wouldn't see him with my eyes, but I would see him with my mind's eye. So one time she wanted to test me. She said, "Well, I want to just come on, like let's just go. How do you know?" And I said, I don't know. I just know." And so we decided to walk down the path anyway. And I stayed by her side, made sure she was safe. And lo and behold, there was a guy off in the distance with not so great energy. And it was scary for her. And she said, "Oh my God." And so she started running. And we ran and we got back to this church that was next to her house at the time. And it had a little playground and a swing set. And it was in the dark. We sat on the swings. And she looked at me and she said, "How did you know? How did you know that there was going to be a guy that was a creepy person down the road?" And I looked at her and I said, I really don't know. I just know." And those were moments that made me realize I'm I'm different than, most of the people that were around me. And so when I became a mother, I was 19 when I was pregnant with my oldest son. Lots of backstories around all of that. I ended up having him just before turning 20, and I started to. My oldest son was diagnosed with heart conditions before leaving the hospital. And again, long stories surrounding all of that. I will talk about another time. He As he got a little bit older, um, I learned techniques called infant massage and, mommy and baby massage, things like that. And so I was able to start practicing hands-on work with him. I had a nurse that was assigned from the community, which was a blessing, and she ended up being a healer. She just didn't openly call herself that to the community, and she would teach me hands-on healing touch and infant massage on my son. And so I realized fairly quickly through the process of doing the infant massage, especially while working with the bowels, that my my oldest son would get constipation quite a bit as an infant, and he was very sensitive to certain foods, and I was breastfeeding, but when he was introduced to baby foods is when it really started. So I realized that I had the capability while massaging him to essentially just like help control his functions of his body. And it developed over time into me realizing that whenever it was time for him to go to sleep, I could just do a certain massage on him and he would immediately go to sleep, or um, different techniques that I would use. I started recognizing over time that I was able to help do those things without even physically touching him. And then from there, it developed into me realizing that I didn't even have to use my hand or like direct the energy out of my hand, that I could just do it telepathically. And so it was like, okay, there's layers and levels to how natural spiritual gifts are able to be utilize and how they function. So I ended up meeting a person who his name was Jason, and he was half African American, half Greek, and he was a spiritual being, but he also did not claim that within his friend groups and things like that. He just had the recognition that he has spiritual gifts. And so one day I was talking to him, and as people are put into your life for a reason, I was talking to him on the phone and I started explaining something to him, and I remember pieces of it, but I don't remember all of it. I think I was about 20 at the time, and or maybe 20. Yeah, I was about 20 at the time. My oldest son was almost two, or no, he was one, sorry. It's a long time ago. Um, anyway, so I was talking to Jason at the time, and I remember I was explaining something to him, and he said to me, he stopped me mid-conversation. He said, "You are one of us." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You shine. You are gifted." And he said, "When you look at people, what do you see? What comes to your mind?" And I started explaining to him, well, I see, like their life story, and I see like what happened to them and the things that they went through, and, get like a snapshot of like who they are as a person. And and then I started realizing that it goes much more deeper if I let it. And I realized in that conversation that I've always done that ever since I could remember. And I used to kind of freak people out because if I looked too deep, I could see traumas and things that they went through. And that was a learning experience because I realized that there are spiritual boundaries and spiritual laws and spiritual respect that we have to have for others when we have certain caliber of gifts and abilities. We're not really permissed to just dive deep into other people's stuff. We have to have permission from them. And so it took me years, and I learned and I taught myself how to have spiritual boundaries. But at first it was difficult because I felt that I didn't know how to control it. And it got to a point for me where I developed anxiety about around being other people. I mean, just being in crowded spaces, being in grocery stores. And when my gifts really started awakening and my abilities, my psychic abilities, my spiritual abilities, my soul gifts, I mean, all of it is like, it just really was like over sensory to the highest degree. And I realized that I did not know how to like block other people out. I didn't know how to think my own thoughts. It was like so loud, and everywhere I would go, it's like I would just be hearing everybody's everything, their thoughts, their feeling, their emotions, their energy. And I tried to go to a mall when one of my oldest son was like two, and I could not I could not handle it. It was like so overwhelming for me. And I realized that just doing mundane, like as he got older and my gifts increased, just doing mundane tasks outside of the house was just totally overwhelming. And so um I just stayed home a lot. I stayed home a lot, and I found myself becoming very comfortable with just being by myself with my son. And eventually I met my now ex-husband, and he he ended up helping me to recognize in the beginning what my gifts were and how they correlated to my life moving forward. In some ways, he did that directly for me. And in other ways, it was through experiencing difficult things with him that made it challenging for me in so many different ways to function normally, that I was forced to have to um, learn things on my own and figure things out on my own and ask my spiritual guidance for help and learn who my spiritual guidance even is, and find my connection to the universe and to the creator, um, God, source, whatever you want to call the one. And it just was like a long stint of a lot of learning and a lot of lessons and a lot of really intense experiences that I went through with him. And he and I were together off and on for around 15 years. And so there were so many different lessons and experiences and all of that that I will get into during other episodes, just not today because that is a loaded story in and of itself. Um, my background in training. So when I was around, I want to say, oh geez, I don't even know how old I was. Um, so my now 12-year-old son, he is he just turned 12. So let's see, this was around the time that I was pregnant with him, or just prior to becoming pregnant with him. I want to say it was around then. One day, I was sitting down and I don't know what I was doing, but I was just sitting there quietly. And all of a sudden, I heard in my mind, you need to Reiki. I heard the word Reiki. And to my conscious awareness, I don't ever remember hearing that word prior in this lifetime. So it was really interesting because when I had heard it, I saw how to spell it. And then I heard the words in my head. It was literally like it dropped into my head. I heard, you need to learn Reiki. And I was like, what the heck is Reiki? So, but I felt a familiar, remembrance in my soul. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit down on the computer and to just spell it how I remembered it was spelled in my mind's eye. And I start reading, and it's like all of a sudden, and I had a lot of experiences like that throughout my life where it's like I'll see something, or like I'll learn about something, or I'll read something, and it's like automatically my soul goes, yeah, you know that. You already know that. Just we're reminding you. And so um as I start to read about Reiki, I'm like, oh, what? Oh, wow. Okay. This is what I already do. Okay. Um, and then so I was like, without hesitation, which I'm so proud of younger me for having no doubts, because man, when I was younger, I doubted everything and was so just resistant to just accepting certain things that my guides and my higher self was trying to get through to me and just help me with moving forward in my life. And oh wow, like just really looking back, I realized like I was really resistant to a lot of things growing up. And I was like, well, how do I know that that's not this, and how do I know that it's not a trick, and how do I know it's not alien beings trying to other beings trying to get me to believe something else. And oh, good luck trying to get me to believe anything back then. But so that's why I say I guess really I'm really proud of myself, my younger me. So I did some research and I ended up learning that there was a Reiki master in the town that I actually was born in, and which was at the time about 45 minutes away or so from where I was living. And I ended up calling her. Her name was Pat Cougar. Shout out to Pat. If you ever hear this, I love you and thank you so much for the opportunities that you gave me. You are so awesome and beautiful. And I hope you're doing amazing after the campfire because, man, that was some crazy shit to go through. Um, I really hope you're doing well, you and your husband. So, Pat, she's gonna hear it one day, watch. Uh, so Pat Cougar, she was awesome. She goes, well, because I didn't have a lot of money to pay for the training at the time. She goes, look, I'm gonna train you for $100, level one Reiki. It's obviously meant for you to learn it. Let's do this. So she put me in her next training. I was so excited and had no idea what I was looking forward to, but I knew it was the right thing. I jumped right in and we did all day long training and uh, she gave us a book to take home called it was by Bodo and Shalila. Um, I have to remember it. There's like Reiki something, but I remember Bodo and Shalila. And such a beautiful book. It was just from the heart and soul, and they just wrote their experiences through doing Reiki. There's just the beautiful healings that they've done and the way that Reiki has helped their life and how to essentially use it properly. And so anyway, Pat really helped me to really up level and activate the process of doing the healing work and activating my healing path for sure. And so when I remember at the end of the training, she said, we're going to do it. We're going to check back in. We're all going to come back together. It was a group training. So we're all going to come back together and we're going to have another meeting after this, but I want to give it some time. She goes, look, your first activation, it's gonna be a bitch. It's gonna be a lot. You're going to go through shedding multiple layers like an onion, and it's not gonna be enjoyable on certain parts of it. I'm just gonna be honest with you. You know, it takes a lifetime and sometimes and some of the stuff comes from other lifetimes, but it takes a lifetime to build up these layers of hurts and traumas and you know, energies that attach to us that are not really so good for us and etc. So she said, you know, it doesn't all shed at once. It does take time, but as you go through this process, just have grace with yourself, drink a lot of water, take better care of yourself, do your healings on yourself every day, practice. And holy God, did that take no time for me because I went home that day and boom, there was a huge thing that happened with my ex-husband. He just freaked out and he was acting out of character and he was just wild with his emotion and it was just so crazy. I remember it was just a lot and I was like, uh, I guess this is part of the the layers. It's like what the heck? Um, so yeah, my process. And just as a precursor, anybody who truly does follow this podcast and really get connected in with the cosmic heart, you're going to learn some things. And I will share the real, raw me with you because I believe that in order to find true healing and achieve true healing, excuse me, you must be authentic and you must be real and you must be raw all the way through. And when we are honest, genuinely honest and authentic with ourselves and others, this is where real, true, deep down healing can happen. And so, yes, I do have quite a story, quite a story. Uh, one for the ages. But through it all, I am finding my healing. And that is one of the biggest gifts ever. So I can honestly say I am truly exponentially, infinitely thankful. I would like to share um, a bit more on the Reiki aspect, and then I want to move on to the next topic before I close out this first podcast. So, when I learned Reiki from Pat, I practiced my Reiki not every single day on others and not every single day on myself. As I moved through the layer shedding, it was essentially a process of cleansing and healing and just releasing fully. And, when you go through so much deep release and external release, it just does so much. It really does. It just does so much to every part of your being. So I always tell people when I do my energy trainings, um, if you don't do healing on yourself every day, don't beat yourself up. Don't be upset at yourself because all that does is create more disharmony and resistance within your spirit and your body and your mind. And then you probably won't do healing on yourself for even longer. So it's very, very important to really truly honor your own individual process with how you choose to go about things and how you feel is best for you. Yes, it is also important to push yourself through your previous blocks and bad habits and lack of self-love and self-care, but it doesn't mean that you need to become angry at yourself or bitter towards yourself if you're lacking in a certain area of self-care. And so I learned that the hard way because when I was doing my work on myself, I would sometimes, I would get upset and I'd say, oh, it's been a week and I haven't even done a full healing session on myself. Looking back, I realized I was practicing my energy work every day and I was learning how to properly cleanse, and I was learning how to develop a whole system for how to even cleanse any lower vibrational, lower frequency energies and entities from me. I mean, I was developing like my whole practice. So it's like, okay, yeah, I wasn't doing a full, head to toe Reiki session, but I was doing the work every single day. And eventually I met someone who was a assistant teacher to a teacher's aide actually to the preschool where my oldest son was attending. And I remember uh, she was very enthusiastic about learning Reiki. She had already done level one as well. And so I had invited her to do level two with me with Pat Cougar. And excuse the background noise. And so when I ended up doing the level two with her, it was a whole new experience because not only do you learn new skill sets, you also learn when you learn the symbols, when you realize that Reiki healing goes even deeper than you had consciously thought, when you're diving into this whole new level of energy healing, you realize, okay, wow, you can do Reiki can go through time and space, which I had already naturally figured that out, but then I had the concept, consciously in my mind at that point. It's like, okay, now I know that I can do this this symbol for distance healing, and now I know that I can, utilize this on anybody all over the world. And so it was like this whole new world of Reiki opened up for me. And when I started practicing level 2 Reiki, that's when I realized, okay, this is like a whole new experience of like what healing work can be. And so I distinctly remember at the time, there was a friend that I had that was experiencing going through being there for a friend that she had who was who had a son who was very uh low functioning autistic, and also had was nonverbal, and he was experiencing going through a heart problem that was very serious. And I remember calling Pat Cougar, and I remember this child came to my dream, and I saw him in the dream, and I was doing healing on him. And this was prior to me calling her. And I called her and I said, "Hey, there's this really serious situation, and this child really needs healing." I forgot how old he was at the time. And I said, he really needs help. Can you help him?" And so I remember asking her, like, so frantic, I was like, I was so worried about him. And she goes, "Jessica, your healing is just as good as mine." And at that, in my head, I'm like, "But you're a Reiki master, I only did level 2." And she said, "Jessica, you are fully capable of healing this child. Your healing is just as good as mine." And so when I asked her, I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "You don't need anything else. You're fully capable of helping him. You're powerful." And I got chills when she said that. And I remember I was at a gas station. I remember I was standing outside pumping gas. And I said, "Oh, okay, well, thank you." And I still had some doubts mentally, and it was like, well, I don't really know, what I'm supposed to do, but I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna trust myself. And I remember doing the opening up the healing session, and doing the symbols for distance healing, and I remember tapping in and hearing him talking, which was really interesting because he was nonverbal, but I heard his spirit, his soul talking to me. And it was such an intense session, and I was told that he had essentially his soul had like predestined for him to experience those experiences, and that was part of his path. And my job essentially in that was to provide a healing and a blessing for the processes moving forward. And so I did, and I prayed over all the doctors that would be working on him and just the whole process in general. And it was just really intense. The whole thing was just a lot. And I remember it was like Pat Cougar, she could have said, "Yeah, just give me their number, and I'll set something up." And later on, I asked her, I said, "Why did you say that to me? Why did you tell me my healing is just as good as yours? I didn't, why did you tell me that?" And she said, "Jessica, from the moment that I first met you, I knew you're already a master." And so that was really powerful. And she really instilled in me a little bit, of faith in myself, even though I had had a lot of self-doubts. And honestly, I still work through different things as time goes on, but she instilled belief in myself that, she saw something in me that many people have seen in me over the years. And with her, I believed her more, you know? And so, anyway, I've had multiple different experiences where I've done healings on people from heart issues to um, brain issues to nervous system issues to I did a healing on a friend's daughter who was nonverbal autistic and she started actually speaking. I've done healing on people who had drug addiction and helped them completely remove the drug addiction. I've done all kinds of healing work. And I've seen so many different things transform for people in their lives for the better. And it truly is such a gift what energy healing can do. And I've said for so long, it needs to be a mainstream taught. It needs mindfulness and meditation should be in every school. It should at least be an option. You know, don't go to the principal's office. Go to the meditation room. Go sit down and meditate. Why do you need to punish and punish and punish instead of recognize why is this child acting like this? Are they going through something? Is everything okay at home? Are they being bullied? You know, are they being abused? What is truly happening for that child for them to behave this way? And this is how I operate all of the time. And so, and I always have, but you know, of course it's deepened over time now that I'm older and I'm a mother, have 4 children, you know, it's definitely become a deeper integrated practice within how I operate. Um, the older I get and, you know, the more experience I have as a mother. And so I see people this way too. And I'm gonna I'm gonna close this podcast out on this note. As a as adults, I see people like this. And we're gonna talk about this more. We're gonna talk about this more in another episode. But one thing I'm gonna say to all my primarily women, but I know there are men that do this too. Um, just because you can see someone at the core of what's going on for them, why they behave the way that they do, why they act out the way that they have, and treat you or others harmfully or harshly or wrong. Um, you understand it just because you do doesn't make it necessary for you to endure suffering from their hurts and their wounds. This is where we as healers and nurturers and lovers and divine beings of light, this is where we learn how to practice having healthy mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual boundaries and putting a certain level of love and gentle and kindness and respect for ourselves before honoring the core root reasons of why our partners or family members or friends or whoever are behaving in certain ways that hurt us. And I'm going to close this very first Cosmic Heart podcast out by saying this is a learning journey. And we're all learning together and individually on our own individual paths, but never forget that we are a collective. And here in this world, we are a collective of souls that are all, each and every one of us, walking each other home. I hope you all have a beautiful day, night, wherever you are, whatever time it is. And I look forward to talking with you in the next one. Hopefully we'll have a guest speaker on. We have a lot of people that are excited to get on the show. All right. Have a beautiful one.